yours. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Tweety. Hi.
Oh, Susan's here.
I'm on.
Okay.
Ann Hunt. Hey, Ann.
Yeah.
There may be some folks who pop on a little bit late. I was actually on the conference call line, which was listed in an earlier email, and then found no one. So then I searched again and found this. So others may join us in a similar fashion, but I'm glad to be here.
And just some meeting etiquette, if you could please mute yourself while Tweedy's presenting. Thanks. Tweedy, go for it.
Okay. Good evening.
Hi, Tweedy.
Hi. Hi, Jay. Okay. You've all watched the video, Will Bridey, Journey to Forgiveness. And first of all, I want to begin to just, this is hard in the sense that, you know, in the video, he talks about, the man talks about how it's important for Native people to tell their story, and how important it is for people to, or Native people to express how they are dealing with the trauma and how they're dealing with all that's going on around them. When I didn't know about the trauma at all, and I think I suspect that a lot of Native people didn't know, and still there are some who don't know about the trauma, that they are living in a generational or intergenerational trauma. So my first time I ever encountered, well, I should start somewhere else. I'm sorry. As a child, as I was growing up, I was beaten. My mom would beat us all the time. I heard later on, or as we grew up in high school, that my older sister would tell us how my dad was abusive to my mom. That was hard for us to imagine or fathom, because my dad never beat us. It was my mom who would beat us. And it was my dad who, and my sister would talk about my dad, how my dad would, how they would run away from him and hide and things like that. And as we grew, like I said, my dad never even touched us. I only seen my dad hit my mom once, but he never touched her again. So that was hard for us to hear my older sister talk about my dad being this way. And my dad would never really say anything about my mom beating us. He would, and then when we got older, we would talk to him about it, and he wouldn't really say anything to her, or he wouldn't say anything to us really about it or anything like that. He just would acknowledge the fact that we were getting beaten. Tried to run away from home once, and I went to a Presbyterian church to report my mom, and the minister made me go back home. Said that it was important that I be at home. So I went back home. And then then as time went by, it wasn't until, well, actually my mom quit beating us after we graduated high school. Then she was no longer beating us, because then we were out of the house. I always asked my mom why. And then one day we were having the Native American caucus would do family camp. And one year at family camp, and honestly, truly, I can't remember even what year it was, but it was like in the 90s, almost, maybe it was like 2000, 2001. I don't remember what, like I said, I don't remember what year, but one year at family camp, we were in California, and family camp had decided, the leadership had decided to invite this man to come do a presentation. And so when he came to do the presentation, he was talking about intergenerational trauma. And as he talked about the intergenerational trauma, he said, I'm going to give you the characteristics of a woman who was at boarding school and characteristics of a man who was at boarding school. And so he wrote on a board and had written out all of the characteristics of a Native woman who'd gone to boarding school, and then had written all of the characteristics of the man. When he was doing that, I realized that he was talking about my mom and dad. And all of the characteristics showed that they were in boarding school, because in boarding school at the time, the boarding school had two classes. One class for men that would show the men how to be auto mechanics, how to be electricians, how to be that kind of work. The women were shown how to be homemakers, how to do homemaking, how to cook meals, how to clean house, how to iron clothes, how to that kind of thing, so that they could be, so that when they left school, they would be able to be hired out to white people, so that they could be their maids. And so, but that was, or be hired at a school. And so when we were finished with that particular course, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know. I talked to another lady later on about all of that, and I was so, I understood now why my parents were the way they were. And so I said, no wonder my mom beat me, because she didn't have any other way to know how to raise anybody, because she was raised, that was how she was raised, in the boarding school. And so when I went into the ministry and my parents had disowned me, I understood why, because my dad didn't want any part of church. He didn't want any part of, he was afraid that I would come back, and my mom was afraid too, that I would come back and tell them that they were devil worshipers, because all of the churches on the reservation would tell them that they are devil worshipers when they were doing their ceremonies or sweat lodge or any kind of ceremony or anything cultural, native. And so my mom and dad was really upset that I had chosen to be a pastor or to be in the church. And so my dad, and then after so many years of being disowned, my dad called me one day and asked me if I would come home and talk. And so I did. And we had a long talk about why I chose the field. And then he proceeded to tell me about his experience at boarding school, and how the ministers or the priests would be coming and they would beat the kids, and how they would teach the dormitory men the leaders, how to beat the kids if they got out of hand. And so my dad said that was why he was really against me coming into the ministry. And we, like I said, we had a long talk about it. And then I talked to my mom about her experience in boarding school as well, and found out that both of them had been punished quite a bit, just simply because they spoke their language. And my dad's rule of the house was that I am not going to teach my kids how to speak Navajo, because I don't want them to be traumatized. I don't want them to be beaten at school. I don't want them to be, and even though my mom was beating us at home, but my dad didn't want us to be beat up at school. And so his thing was that I will not teach my kids Navajo. I don't even want them to have an accent. And so they never taught us Navajo, although when they would talk Navajo to each other, we were beginning to understand what they were saying. And so, so we understood that piece. As my dad got older, he then regretted his decision not to teach us Navajo, and said, you kids really should try to learn to speak Navajo. And then as I said, as I got more into school and before graduation, and I got to know, my dad and I would talk a lot about the church. We would talk a lot about what I was being taught, and we would talk about, again, his experience. And so, but one day after all of that had kind of gone underneath after we got through all of that, my daughter and I decided to go visit the boarding school where my mom went to school, and saw where, because the school's still standing, it's still operating as a school. And we went over to look at it and saw where they would take the kids when they were punished for speaking their language, and they would put them in the basement, and they're in the back of the building. There you'd see these like cell windows, and it was in the basement. And so we would go look. We look into the windows, and it looked like a little cell, like a little jail cell. And there was nothing that they could sleep on, or nothing that they could sit on. There was just all floor, and really a crummy looking place to be. Since then, they boarded up that door where they would throw the kids, and in the video, you heard the one lady talk about them throwing the kids down the chute. Well, that was how it was over at my mom's school. If you opened up the doors, there was this little slide thing, and they would just throw the kids in, and there would be an adult down there that wouldn't catch the kids, but when the kids came in, they would then grab the kids and throw them in one of the little cells. And that's how they would take the kids. They would drag them out. And my mom talked about how she was dragged out and thrown down. And then once they finished their punishment, then they would be down there for days and wouldn't be given any food, or if it was in the wintertime, they would not be given any blankets at all. And she said that when they would come out, then they would be given extra chores, and they would be given a punishment, and they would come and come and beat them. They would come and whip them, spank them, and then again come up with a different kind of punishment for them after they got out of that little cell. So I was beginning to understand more about where my parents had been and why my parents did what they did, and understood more about about them beating. I had to work hard at once I understood all that, and Rolina was little, a part of me wanted to beat the crap out of my daughter. A part of me was so angry, and I didn't know where the anger was coming from. I worked really hard to break that anger, to work hard to not beat her. There was only one time that I hit my daughter so hard that she went to school with a bruise on her face, and I should have never hit her. I mean, that's one of my greatest regrets is when I hit her when she was in junior high. And but I worked hard. I always tried to teach her that she had a choice in decisions that were made, and she had a choice in how things were handled in the household. And so I had to work hard to not be angry, and because I wasn't, and I didn't know, like I said, I didn't know why I was angry. So when I see my family, it's hard. I mean, if they don't know about the trauma, and I have to teach them, it's hard to teach them about the trauma because they don't want to admit how much pain they're in or how much hurt they're in. And it's hard to talk to them when they rely on church, and especially if it's Pentecostal churches, because a lot of Pentecostal churches hold natives hostage, I think, on the reservation. So it's just working through a lot of things that have happened. So the video was when I first met this man who did the video, his name is Don. We were in Salt Lake City, and he was talking about how a lot of Native people are beginning to come to the realization of what happened in their families and the realization about the trauma. And he was telling us how hard it was for him to make the video because he had to decide which story would go in and which story would stay out. And he said there was so much stories that they had. In fact, one lady even talked about how she remembered washing dishes one day and in this boarding school, and she's washing dishes, and the nuns brought in I guess one of the Native girls got pregnant by the priest, and she had her baby. And after she had her baby, the nun walked in with the baby, and then the lady was washing dishes, and the nun walked in with this baby in her arms, and then proceeded to throw the baby into the incinerator. There was a lot of stories like that Don had to decide whether that was going to go into the video or not. There's another video he has out that has a lot more stories in it. And so there was a lot of stories like that he was trying to decide if it's really important to keep it into the video or not. But when he told us that story, we were of course appalled at it. And he said that a lot of Native kids were beaten, and a lot of Native kids were traumatized sexually and abusively, and of course psychologically. And so they had to work and try to figure out how to help Native communities and Native people in their communities to deal with the trauma. And because I'm not in my community, I have to find ways to help with and be in the community with Natives so we can work together to work through the trauma. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Hello?
Thank you for sharing.
I don't really have a question. I mean, I really appreciate having this conversation. It's the same kind of conversation that happens in the Black community as well around trauma from slavery. And one of the hardest things, I think, is, as you said already, Tweedy, is getting people to actually understand that they have been traumatized and that they still carry that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
These, from generations past, and that's a hard piece. It's not happening directly, to folks right now. But the trauma is like it happened yesterday, and oftentimes we just don't understand that we are still carrying that trauma in our, in our,
Right.
in our minds.
Yeah, Tweedy, I just want to thank you for, the risk and the courage you took in sharing your story. How hard that must be to share that, and yet how important it is that you can do that and that we can all hear it. And, I'm really grateful for your courage to do that. So thank you very much.
It is hard because, and I feel safe enough in this community to share. I think I have to feel safe in order to share what I just shared.
Yes.
And it's even hard for, my brother and sisters, it's hard for me to, my sister, my twin, understand, because she, it was us that we were getting beaten, and we were trying to figure out why. And once I figured it out, I was trying to teach my sister, even my sister, my own twin, was in denial. She was like, I can't imagine why this or that. And I tried to explain to her, and she doesn't understand that trauma. She doesn't understand. I don't know if she doesn't want to. Maybe it's easier for her to just deny it, and so she doesn't have to deal with it, and not be even talk about it at all. So it's even in my own family that's hard to talk with.
Tweedy, I also want to say thank you. And I know that the Wellbriety is centered on a lot of the horrific abuse that happened in the Indian schools. I wonder, having heard you in Red Bank talk about the land, I wonder if there's anything you would like to say about the trauma that has been caused and continues to be caused in the way that those in power, white people, continue to treat the land, and how that would factor in, if it does connect in any ways for you. Thanks.
Yeah, it does. Like at Big Mountain, for years and years and years, at Big Mountain, they've had the coal and the what do you call it? I'm sorry, the coal, and because they want to extract the coal from the land, and of course the pipelines that are going in across the country. But rather the coal on our reservation, Navajos, especially older Navajos that are still living off the land, a lot of them are talking about how, because they view the earth as a part of them, and so when people come in and take out coal, they say they're taking out the blood, the lifeline of the earth. And so it brings a lot of trauma to them, because then they're having to, if they're sitting, like the people at Big Mountain, they're sitting on the coal, and so the coal company wants to come in and remove them. But Black Mesa now was closed. That was up on Big Mountain, that's closed now, and the companies that were up there was promised to help regenerate the earth so that it would be lush and nice up there, but they haven't done anything really. There's still a lot of the water that's contaminated. There's still a lot of the and the really horrible stuff that's left behind. They just left it. So when you're driving up on 89 towards Kayenta, you'll see where the coal companies were. And so there's still a lot of that remnants and remembrance of how it used to be up there. And so people are still working at trying to get the earth renewed so that it could be better where they live. And it does affect them a lot. I know that the elders are still trying to work through all of that affects them as they live off the land. So. And there's still a lot of tailings from the uranium mines that were up there. There's still the tailings. They said that the tailings will take a lot of years before the tailings are actually gone. But when you're driving north, you can see the tailings. There are a lot of unhealthy, I mean, when babies are born, there's a lot of babies that are born with a lot of defects. And it seems the number's growing of the defects of the babies. So the tailings are still around, and not only in that area, I mean all over the place. There's still, if you're driving across the reservation, you can still see the tailings. So yeah, it's pretty bad.
Tweedy, this is Day. I want to honor you and your wisdom and your sharing. And as I take, your words into my heart and a story, the narrative, the experiences, I would carry in my heart always. And as, as we, as I was saying, about wanting to become an ally, because I love you and I care so much about you, it just changes. So I'm holding the story as sacred. That is what I'm trying to say. Your words, your life, and the work that you do to educate, I hold that as sacred.
Thank you.
Tweety, I want to say I'm sorry, because I think that hearing the story it's not enough. One of the things that when I heard first person stories when we were in Birmingham, the guy that had been incarcerated for so long, he said, for something that he didn't do, he said, nobody's ever said I'm sorry. And so I want to say I'm sorry. When I was watching those first person stories, narratives from that video, it breaks my heart to know that anybody could be treated as less than human, even as I recognize and understand my own history as a Black person. It still breaks my heart to know that anyone is, has to carry that kind of history and trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because I really believe that in my heart that we're all connected, whether we want to be or whether we think we are or not. It's all of our, we are all traumatized. And we, I think that your story is my story and my story is your story. And so if one of us are traumatized, we all are. And so I just want to say I'm sorry.
There is a saying that one of the Native leaders says that when something befalls one person, befalls all of us, so that we're really all in it together. We are, and you're right, we are all in it together. I truly believe that as well. And I think the really good thing about this Bridie is that he's working hard. Don is working hard and trying to bring healing to communities, to Native communities. it's just working at trying to help Native communities to recognize the trauma. And once it's recognized, it then can be dealt with. And it is really hard to get people to recognize the trauma, so that they can start working towards being better and being healed. And so and once, like I said, and I had to learn how to forgive myself in terms of my daughter. And my daughter and I talked about it, and I told her that I said that was a really dumb, because my brother, it was a dumb reason I hit her. It was a dumb reason that I got mad. And so one of the of my daughter is that when I get angry about something, she says, and Felipe was really good. Felipe and my daughter was really good at this. They would always say, "So why are you mad? Why is this bringing anger to you?" And it would help me to stop and think about, yeah, why am I mad about this? There's no reason for me to be angry about something, something silly. That whole thing around my daughter was that it was winter time, and my daughter was in 7th grade. My brother had given her this really nice down coat for the winter time, and the down coat is kind of puffy, and so she wore it like 2 or 3 times to school, and I guess it got caught in her locker because the lockers were little, and so she had a hard time getting in and out of her locker because of that coat getting stuck. So she decided one day not to wear it anymore. I thought she should be wearing it because it was so cold. That was what, and her, which I perceived as her talking back to me, is why I hit her. And of course, she went to school with a little bruise on her face, and the teachers at the school was questioning her about her bruise, and she said, "Oh, I slipped on some ice and fell." When she came home, I was mortified at the fact that I had bruised my daughter's face. And so we talked about it, and we cried about it, of course. And that was like I said, my biggest regret. And then she told me why she was no longer wearing the coat, because it had got caught in her locker, and she had a hard time getting in and out of her locker. So, the healing needs to be. I continually work on the healing, and continually work on my anger, and continually work on my spirituality around all of that, and trying to help other people, other Native people, identify it, and trying to help them, once they've identified it, to help them come to some healing, and try to work, what can you do to help heal you, and the community that you're in. And so that I work at all the time, and I always say education is really part of that. And so when I'm in a white church, I'm always having to teach. There are days when I want to just say, "Oh, forget it." I don't want to teach anymore. But it's really important to do the education piece so that they will understand and know that they can't talk to people like crazy talk. When that one time when I fell that New Year's Day, and one of the church members said, "Oh, she was drinking a bunch of fire water." So I had to, I was not happy about that statement. So I explained that I said, "You're assuming that I'm an alcoholic, and I don't like that assumption." And so I had to explain and teach at the same time about that, what that means. And I didn't like, so that not to be I wanted to turn around and hit the guy, you know, because I was mad about his statement. But then again, I had to say to him, okay, what can I teach him to not, or teach not only him, but the congregation to not say such crazy things to me. And so, so I feel like I'm always trying to teach people and help persons in where they are and where they're at. So.
Tweedy, I'm remembering when I was down and you were serving that church in Phoenix, and you had, you know, you were trying to continue some of the Native American customs, and how the church just continued this traumatizing you by demanding that, you know, the sweat lodge come down, and that you couldn't, you know, you couldn't wear your native dress. And I mean, it isn't like the trauma's even over, you know, it
Right.
just continues. And, you know, it just gives me such pain and sorrow that, you know, that it's not over.
Yeah.
It continues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's not, I'm not going to go there, but it's ignorance. It's just, you know, people not really wanting to know or learn. And so I mean, I even did it in the newsletter. I even wrote this newsletter about things people said to me. And one lady came to my office afterwards and said, I don't think you should be writing this in a newsletter. I don't think you should. And I said, well, it's my way of addressing what's being said to me. And I want people to know that it's crazy. I don't go around saying crazy stuff to you about being white. And, you know, and I said, it's the only way that I could address without being overtly angry about what has been said to me. So, yeah. And you're right. It's always the constant teaching. We're still battling the stuff at Four Corners, you know, we're still battling that in Four Corners area where the man who started the ministry at Four Corners is still being oppressive. He's still there. He's still being and telling Native people that that we're wrong in believing in how we believe, and that we can't be Navajos and Christians at the same time. We have to be Navajo. We have to be Christians. We can't be Navajo. And so yeah.
You know, Tweety, I think of the times that, you know, I've missed the opportunity, you know, I didn't understand something, and then I, you know, learn, and I look back and I think, oh, you know, how could I have been so, you know, insensitive? How could I have been so cruel to my friend who's Native American when we were at the School of Divinity? And I think back now of that, and because I'm learning more, and I think, oh, really? And then, so instead of becoming like overwhelmed by the, you know, all the guilt and all that kind of stuff that, you know, like white people like to do, my chance now is to be a part of the change, to be a part of the difference, because I know what I have, and I am so sorry for having done those things that I did while I was at the School of Divinity. And I know so much more, and the importance that, you know, like that, you know, because we all are inter-are, so it's about us. And I'm just grateful for your sharing. Thank you. And me too. Look out, world. Yeah.
Well, you bring up seminary, and when I was in seminary, I was doing the same thing in seminary as I did in the churches. You know, that I do in the churches now. When I was in seminary, I did a lot of the teaching about a lot about the native ways, and when people would say something silly or whatever, then I would confront them and say, no, that's not how it is. And I would, and I remember into my second year of seminary, there was what had happened? There was a group of students. We had to be in colloquial groups, and one of the colloquial groups decided that they were going to do this play at lunchtime, and proceeded to do this play, and they were pretending to be, now there's in the Sioux culture in the nation of the Sioux Nation, there is a thing called the Red Road, and the Red Road is being spiritually working on your spirituality, being in spirit, in your spirit, working on all of your spirituality powers and things like that. And so in their play, they were pretending to be on the Red Road, but they were mocking it, and they were making fun of it. And George Tinker, who was the professor at the time, when we were sitting together at lunch, and he, bless you, and he got up and walked out of the luncheon, and I got up and followed him out, and so the students then realized they had done something wrong because we got up and walked out. And so then he wrote this letter to the student body, and it was in everybody's box the next day. And there was this whole big hoopla about it. I mean, there was all the students were upset. And so they decided to have a town meeting. And so at the town meeting, George Tinker had invited a medicine person to do smudging, to bring the smoke, and so that people could be peaceful and to be an experience and have that experience of smudging, the smoke. And so the medicine person had everybody, so we were in a circle, this huge circle, and the medicine person then proceeded to say to all the women, because you can't do smudging when you're in your menstrual cycle. And so the medicine person asked all the women, if you are on your menstrual cycle, for you to leave. Women thought he was saying women ministers to leave. So a bunch of the women ministers left, or women who were in ministry left, and they were outside the room and angry. They were angry. When I left the room to go to the restroom, I was confronted by these women. And one woman was really tall, and she was towering over me, and she was just angry and beside herself. And she was saying, why did we have to leave the room? Why did the women in ministry have to? How come all the women didn't leave? And just proceeded to. So not only did we have to deal with what would happen at the lunch, but we also now had to deal with the women who were really angry. And that took a while for us to work through all of that anger and all of the things that was going on at the time. And it took us a while. And George Tinker and I had to try to tell the women what that meant, because when you're on your menstrual cycle, you're in power. You have power, and the two powers cannot be mixed. And so we were trying to explain to them, and oh my gosh, that was such a hard time for us to work through all of that anger that was going on at that time. But we did. I mean, we finally worked through it, and I tried to help people understand as Native people where we were at and what was going on during that time. Any questions or thoughts?
Tweedy, do you think that that the whale variety movement, well, let me ask a different question. How could I, as a white person, support the whale variety movement?
That's a good question. I would have to find out how we could do that. I know that we could use the video wherever we're at, because if you notice that when you're watching the video, it says that it's for anybody's use to be used, and it definitely could be used in different venues in different ways. That's one way to begin to talk about the trauma and how it affects not only one person, but affects the whole community. And then to start working at how can we start healing together and working together in the healing process. That would be my.
Yeah, that's really helpful. That's a great list. And how we heal together, you remind me of some of the parts of the video where the determination is to forgive.
Yeah.
For one's own healing. It has nothing to do about the oppressor.
Right.
The one who was tormenting, but the healing is my choice.
Yes.
And that's a universal message, as you say. We're all in that together.
Right. Right.
Tweedy, I just this is Vicky. I want to honor Felipe and Rolina as well as you when you mentioned that they would ask you, why are you angry? What a gift.
Yes.
For them to have you in their life, but for you to have them. What an important question. I mean, I will keep that on my shoulders. Why am I so angry? And so I know your love for them, and I just want to honor them, Felipe and Rolina, at this moment, as well as you.
Thank you. Yeah, it threw me for a loop when the first time Rolina asked the question, why are you so angry? And I wanted to yell at her. I wanted to yell at her. I did. I wanted to yell at her, but I didn't. It took me a while to process the question. And once I did, I realized what an important question that was. And then when I married Felipe, because Felipe was this calm, peaceful person, he, and for me, for Felipe to ask the question as Rolina did, I asked Felipe if he had been talking to Rolina, and of course he hadn't, but I felt like they had been in cahoots together. Also, it did help me, and I told Felipe and Rolina how helpful that has been for them to come and say to me, why are you so angry? Why does that make you mad? And it helped me to process that through and saying, okay, yeah, why is that? Why that's silly. Why did it make me so upset that turned out like that, or that turned out that way, or whatever? It just, so yeah, it was very, it had been very, and it continues to be helpful, even though even though I'm not with Rolina all the time, and Felipe's no longer here. It still helps me when I get really angry about something to sit back and say, okay, why am I angry about this? It does still help, yes.
More helpful than why aren't you angrier?
Yeah. Right. Right.
But yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Tweety, are your parents alive?
No, they're both
Gone. Come back, Tweety. Tweety, say that again. We lost you for a
yes.
minute.
They're both gone.
Okay.
They're both gone. My mom passed first, and then my dad. My mom couldn't even answer the questions. My dad was more apt to talk about the trauma than my mom was. And when my mom was dying, I would try to talk to her about it, and she wouldn't talk about it. She wouldn't acknowledge anything. And when I asked her why she beat us, she couldn't even answer. And so I just finally just let it go. But I told her towards the end that I forgive her. And I forgive her because I now understand why. And told her that I wanted to hear her words about it, but understand why she couldn't talk about it either. And so I told her I did forgive her. So. It was hard. It was really hard especially when they banned me from the family and said I couldn't no longer attend ceremonies with them because they were so afraid that I would call them devil worshippers. I would never call them devil worshippers.
Yeah.
But they didn't understand that. They didn't think I would. They would think I would hook up with the holy rollers that were coming through town and.
So it was just the church within a church movement that you that rolled through town.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Good reason to be afraid.
Very afraid.
Yeah. Yes.
Tweety, one of the things that really struck me about the video was the role of spirituality in the healing process and the importance of that in the elders' teachings.
Yes.
And you've mentioned your spirituality a few times as you've shared, but I would just love to invite you to talk more about your own experience of spirituality, broadly construed, in your own healing process.
Okay. My grandfather was a medicine man. So I was raised knowing the spirituality in that sense. And I was raised knowing the ceremonies and what all involved in the culture and things like that. It was always helpful when something would happen. I could go to my grandfather and he would always sing a blessing song. And so it was always helpful for me as I was growing up, even after I graduated high school, and I would go see him. And he didn't speak English at all. But it was always helpful because he always knew something was going on. So he would always give me a blessing. I always wanted to stay with him and live with him, but he always sent me back to school. Said it was really important for me to be in school. So, but he, but I always remembered those songs. I always remembered how important it was to keep the culture alive, and what my parents had taught me and my grandfather. I then in turn have been teaching Rolina about it as well. And the spirituality piece is really important. It is. And I always say that I think the spirituality and the humor is what kept Native people alive all these years. You know, over the 500 years of the beginning of the verse coming of the white people, I'd say that's what kept us alive, was the spirituality and the humor. For us to be in it, to learn it, and to keep it going, to keep it, to keep it before us. I continually go up north when I feel that I need to be near family or near my spiritual roots. So I always go north. I always go back to visit my family up north and just be in that place where my grandfather lived. And I always stay up there for like a day or two, maybe 3 days, and just so that I could know that I'm well cared for. I'm always reminded of my grandfather's teachings and his words, and so when I go up there, I spent time by myself up in that place. I have to be in the silence. The silence is really important. My grandfather used to say that if you don't understand my silence, you won't understand my words. And so I always stay in the silence because it's really important. And know that when I'm in the silence, then I'm with the Spirit, and know that it's really important to get strength from that and to get renewed by that sense of spirit around me. So I always do that. I always go back up and be a part of the family that is still involved in the spirituality, the Navajo way of life. Some of my family members are Mormons. Other family members are belong to churches, different churches up there. But there are also the family part that is still very much into the culture and the medicine people and our old ways. And so that's who I usually go to visit, is them. They always sense that if I need a blessing ceremony, we'll hire someone to come in and do a blessing ceremony. So that's how I usually take care of things, and I go up and take care of that spiritual side of me. Navajos have a way of when babies are born, and that belly button that falls off, that part of the belly button that falls off. Well, Navajos take that and they bury it near the home, so that if you should wander and go off the reservation and visit other places, then or go to decide to live off the reservation, that belly button always brings you home, because it's Navajos believe that when you bury it at home, then you're going to always return to that place. And so when my daughter was born, I buried my daughter's belly button with the Bible and a dictionary. And so that she always has that longing to be home, but also she has that wanting to learn and wanting to be in her spiritual life. So that's what I buried with my daughter's belly button. I forget, my mom told me one time what mine was buried with, and I don't quite remember, but mine's buried it because I was born at home, and so it's buried where I was born, so that we always return home. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the answer, and thank you for everything tonight.
Yeah.
That idea of home is so rich. That is just so rich.
Yeah.
To know that you always have a place to be.
Right. Yeah.
It's very rich.
Any other questions?
It's beautiful. I so appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
It was
Tweety.
tremendous, Tweety.
Hi,
Thank you,
Tweety.
Deanna.
Just want to thank you very much for sharing. I really don't know what to say, and I do want to really, like, say, take a look at the video, which I didn't really have a chance to look at, but I just want to thank you very much.
Mhm.
Sure. Thank you, Bert.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Tweety, for sharing so much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And the like in the documentary that we looked at,